So thanks again for joining us and welcome to the webinar. So the first thing we were going to cover off today was thinking about PR itself and broadly communications and how you can do it without allocating a huge budget to it. It's always one of the biggest issues that I face when I'm talking with not-for-profits who come to us and say there is so much to do and there is so many important issues to prosecute, and how do we do it without a lot of budget? And I'm always firmly of the view that you can try and do pretty much most of what you want to achieve with not much budget at all. It really is really driven by your determination and your will, and how you creatively deploy the available resources you've got and the available budget that you've got. So we'll spend a bit of time thinking about that, but I'm firmly of the view that you can do anything you want if with a little bit of determination. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that a little bit further on down the track. So in this webinar, we're going to look at low-cost PR marketing, and how they are easy to do and maintain. So first of all, just some key low budget tips broadly. I'm going to give you a couple of those up front before we get started. Make sure you have the basics working in your favour. So that means you've got to have a database, a list of your contacts, have that functioning so that you can use those people, you can deploy them and engage them to support you, and you can get your members and your other stakeholders really working in your favour, retweeting or whatever you're doing. But if you don't have a database, and so often I have encountered, not-for-profits who haven't had a database in place, and it's one of the first things that I say to them is try and get that database in place. It doesn't need you to spend a lot of money doing that. It could just be an Excel spreadsheet at the very, very minimum. It can be something, a more complicated CRM system, but they're not expensive. We use a system called Basecamp and Highrise, which I think costs me $20 a month. And we've got about 6,000 or 7,000 people on our database. So, it's perfectly doable to do this stuff on a low budget. It's just exploring what the options are and going out and having a go at it. Second thing is go to where your people are, your tribe is, I call them. There's no point in trying to get on to Sunrise or onto AM or into the Sydney Morning Herald if that's not where your people that you want to talk to are listening and reading or watching. So you first of all got to make sure that you know where they're going. So
Muted. Unmuted.
Sorry, I think you might have missed me for a second then. I think for some reason it muted me. So the second point I made was go to where your tribe is. Make sure that you're talking to them where they are located. So there's no point in talking to them, through AM or through the Financial Review if that's not where your people are, the people of your community and your networks. Maximize. We've spent a bit of time today looking at this. Maximize low-cost social media. And particularly social media management tools. There's a lot of these available now for very low cost, such as Market Me Suite or Sprout Social. There's a number of them that enable you to use a whole lot of platforms all at the same time for not a lot of money. So you can have 10 or 15 or whatever platforms you've got, all of your various Facebook pages, your Twitter accounts, whatever, all getting the same content simultaneously. And it really is very effective use of your time. They don't cost a lot of money to set up. So I'd really recommend those. So the next thing that you need to be thinking about is some of the key tools before we move on to drilling down into PR. The multimedia toolkit is a really useful thing to have, and I'm sure some of you already got these in place, but what does that look like for you? Often people will want some material, and rather than scrambling around each time, do it once, do it neatly and make it look good, and then just keep it updated. And that might just be some really lovely photos and a one-page document and an e-card that you might email, or a footer that you might be able to send supporters to use. Think about those different tools that you might be able to use in an e-kit, because that's so often how people are communicating, and it's a really, really cost-effective way of communicating to people who might support you or might be interested in what you're doing. So one of the things is you need to be thinking about not waiting for people to come to you. You need to make sure that you're out there using all of the channels available. I mean, we've set up a YouTube channel. There are all sorts of other platforms out there that you can take the content out to people and try and create the talkability about what you're doing. And so try to think about what those channels are. We'll get on to about, how many channels is enough, but obviously don't do things that you can't resource, but have a think about what might be most effective for you. And the other thing is, think about being creative. Being creative doesn't cost a lot of money. What is experiential marketing? Well, we'll talk about this in a bit more detail, but it's often called guerrilla marketing, and it's not about gorillas, but it's about, doing something that's a little bit offbeat. Dare I say, don't do anything that's illegal. Some people do that. I'm not trying to urge you to do illegal things at all, but doing something creative. I heard about Wires the other day, I think, who are taking into the streets of Sydney a grown person in a big koala suit and mocking up an incident where that koala is injured and bleeding. It's clearly not a koala; it's a grown person in a suit. But there's a sort of street theatre element to it. It demonstrates what Wires does, and it brings it into the CBD where you've got a lot of people. So thinking about doing something like that when you've got a campaign or something momentous, can really work well, and it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And the other thing is it can drive media interest as well, and talkability both online and in the free media. So having a think about those sorts of things is always a good thing as well. We'll think about that a little bit later as well. So some of the ideas banks before we get going, doing media release shout outs for volunteers or your program participants, that often gets a lot of interest from media. Online advertising, particularly on blogs, that can be quite low cost because a lot of blogs are seeking out people's ad placements, but they've got a lot of page views, and so it's really worth exploring some niche blogs that may resonate with your supporters or your tribe, if you like. Developing a strategic social media program, we'll talk about this in a second in some detail. Moving newsletters to online only. I've got a couple of clients at the moment who, when I've started working with them, they've said we are still mailing out bi-monthly physical newsletters. We're stuffing them. They're going out to 5,000 people. And there's a whole lot of mail costs involved with that, and time and money with printing. And I just said, well, pretty much everyone for a mainstream organisation these days is online. And yes, there are people who aren't online. Absolutely, there are people who seek not to be online. There are people who are elderly and have never been online, or disadvantaged, or various other groups. But I think increasingly people are online, and so I think thinking about going online is a really good, cost-effective way of communicating. Creating meaningful gifts. We'll think about that in a little bit more detail later on. But again, doesn't have to be expensive. It can increase the talkability of what you do. We send out tea towels to people, and they're fun tea towels. They reflect some of the fun infographics on our site, and I've had grown men, and apologies if there are any men listening who'd like tea towels, but I've had grown men, CEOs of not-for-profits who I don't know, ring me and say, thanks so much for the tea towel, it's really lovely. And so sometimes getting something like that, to a key supporter or a key group that you want to get on side, or just as a thank you, can really help. It doesn't have to break the bank. They cost sort of $5 or $8 to get them there, which is a pretty cost-effective gift. So let's move on to effective PR for a little while before we go further. One of the things, obviously, media releases are useful. It's not the only way to talk to people, and we'll talk about other ways in a moment, social media being obviously the primary way. A media release can look in a lot of different forms. It could just be a pitch to an individual journalist, and that journalist, is someone that you know or someone you want to introduce yourself to, and that's absolutely very legitimate to do. I think the media releases are less and less the more favoured way of getting through to people, but they are still very much an option. And they're an option of having a lot of information in one place. It's the who, why, where, and what sort of principles. So think about the media release as something that you can do, but I think it's not just the only thing that you need to rely on. Often papers will want a photo to accompany the story, and I can count on, the fingers of both hands and all my toes in the last 4 years, how many times we have given stories, not just to little local papers, but to mainstream papers, the Canberra Times, the Sydney Morning Herald, the Age. We've given them a story, we've given them a photo, and that story has appeared with not a lot of editing, or a little bit of editing, or perhaps just editing down, and the photos appeared in there. And what we've given them is a photo that we've taken usually professionally. They're not going to use a photo from your iPhone, but something that probably only might cost you $100 to get done. But I tell you, if it can get into a mainstream paper, both online and in print, you've really won the lottery there in terms of the investment of that money. So, obviously think about how you might be able to maximise getting the media to, getting the content to the media, rather than waiting for the media to come to you, because they won't always do that. So the other, the checklist that I always go through with people is, talk. I think these days we're so reliant on email. We don't always talk to each other. I say this to people when I speak often is, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have email, and we didn't have desktop computers, and we, when I very first started, we had typewriters. My 9-year-old daughter asked me a couple of days ago whether or not she saw a picture of her, or someone brought an old slate board from the 1800s into the office, or into the school, sorry, and asked. She then came home to me and she said, "Did you used to use those at school?" And I'm not that old, but we didn't have desktop computers, and we did use a typewriter for the first year or so of my work. But so often I think people are really relying on emails. They're sending an email and they hope that it's just going to solve the problem. They're not going to pick up the phone. They just think someone will respond. If they send a second email, they'll absolutely definitely respond. And if the third email doesn't work well, they're not interested. You don't know that. And I think rather than relying on that email to do the job for you, talking to people is, I think, helpful and doesn't cost a lot of money. What I always do say to people is, don't leave a message on the phone always for journalists, because I'm married to one, and I have been one in the past, and I'm sure some of you may have also been journalists yourselves. They're time pressed, increasingly under resourced, and under pressure. And so I think my husband one stage in the last few weeks had 800 and something unopened emails in his inbox, and 20 something voicemail messages that he hadn't listened to. So I always say to people, don't leave a message, just keep ringing until you get that person. And yes, you run the risk of getting a restraining order against you, but ultimately that's what journalists are there for. As I say, that's what politicians are there to listen to our problems. Journalists are there to get our information, and if you're polite about it, I think that they're really in many respects duty bound to take that information. Engage kids in schools. I don't mean that in a corny way, but obviously, if you can get the schools involved, it's a way of getting the community on board, parents, local media, potential funding, and all of those things, and spin off from that. So thinking about how you might be able to get your campaign involved with your school or a school network, I think is useful. Using photos, we did talk about that. They're always more clickable. Statistics indicate that on Twitter and Facebook, they are far, far more clickable than just putting a bunch of words or just a bunch of, dot points. If you've got a great, strong photo, people will click on it. Say thank you to people. If you're working in a not-for-profit and you then get someone covers you, emailing them a thank you, sending them a handwritten note. I write a lot of handwritten notes to people. We send a lot of notes out to sort of say thanks for whatever it is that we've done with them, or that might be stakeholders or whoever that is. Obviously, you've got to be careful about what that message is, but I think a thank you doesn't ever go astray. Go online. We're going to talk about this in a second, but it's cheap and highly effective. And deploy your networks. I mean, so often someone says to me, we do education training, or we do workshops with X or Y networks, or we're working with all the young people in this particular cohort right across Australia, or whatever it is. I then say to them, so what does that look like? We've had since inception 3,600 people, and there's their parents and there's their communities. And when you actually sit down and listen to all this, you've actually got this huge network that you can deploy in your favor, because these people, you've helped them. They've tapped into into what you're doing. They've benefited from how you've helped them. They should be one of your biggest supporters. They should be proselytizing for you. They should be your biggest fans. So deploy those networks, deploy the members, deploy your supporters, deploy whoever you're helping, and any other groups. I'm working with Relationships Australia at the moment. I think there might be someone online from Relationships Australia, but and we're working on Neighbour Day, and one of the things they're doing really effectively, and they're going to be doing on the run up to Neighbour Day next year, is asking a whole lot of organisations to retweet a couple of simple messages about Neighbour Day. It's a really lovely, simple principle. Neighbour Day is about being neighbourly and kind to the people that you live near in your community. It's a pretty simple message. They're going to ask a whole lot of people to support that, and I think they'll probably get a lot of support. So just think about how you can deploy other people who are in your network, other groups that you work with, to sort of retweet or repeat your message. So let's move on to social media and how you can resource it on a budget. I think some people often get really daunted by social media. If they're not doing it, they go, okay, what sort of platform should I have? There is 23 million of them. When you go to the App Store, which one do I need? Well, you don't need all of them, and you don't need a lot of them, and you probably only need a few to really dip your toe or big foot or your foot in the water, mixed metaphors. But, you need to just think about what you can resource, because pretty much they're all free. The money comes into the staff time, really is where it boils down to. So, and any content you need to create that content to put on. So that's where the money comes in. So the ones that I always suggest to people that they look at, and we'll drill down to this in a second, is Twitter is a good platform for sort of an engaged, highly engaged, perhaps a more elite audience, if you want to call it that. Although I'm not sure that you'd think of Lady Gaga and her followers as elite, but in some respects she probably thinks that. People. I know my husband he looks for breaking news on Twitter, because he's got 6,500 followers. He follows about 1,000 people, and news is breaking on Twitter. People will put the gossip up there. It's rumors, it's innuendo, it's stuff that needs to be drilled down into for him. In his view, if it's not on Twitter, it's not news. So, depending on where you are, what sort of not-for-profit organisation you're working with, Twitter might be a good place for you. Facebook, I think, is a great network and not a great platform for people who just want to inform pictorially. Although Twitter is increasingly pictorial, it's really in many respects a small Facebook feed nowadays when you look at it. But Facebook, I think, is where people go to feel good. Generally speaking, they sit down, and the research shows that when people go to Facebook, they're feeling in a good space. So yes, you'll always find a negative story on Facebook, but they increasingly want to go there to find out things that will uplift them, and often your stories will help them do that. There are lots of other platforms that you can look at. LinkedIn is a great one. We'll talk about LinkedIn in a moment. There are some pictorial, picture-led platforms. There's YouTube. There's video platforms. A lot of these video platforms like Tout and Vine, who allow you to take short video clips and then push them out through other platforms like Twitter and Facebook, are really great. Instagram now has in-bed video as well as photos. My 12-year-old is an avid supporter of Instagram, but I actually think it's a great resource to be able to use as well. And you can repost that onto Twitter and Facebook, and I think that's one worth exploring. There are lots of them, but my advice would be to do a few of them well rather than a lot not well at all. So social media allows you to talk to a lot of people, new audiences, in some really compelling ways. So we'll just have a look at some of those, and then we'll get to some questions in about 5 or 10 minutes. But if you've got any questions, do go ahead and pop them up, because I can see them. In fact, sorry, just a couple of people have sent me a message about the sound earlier. No, that's all good. But I can see your questions. If you've got any questions, just let me know. Now, so social media is really effective. We need to ask, though, what are you going to do with it, rather than just go on it and put endless content on it. You need to be able to have a raison d'etre, if you like, to do it before you start. So what do you want to engage with? Who do you want to engage with? What do you want to say to them? You need to ask yourself these things. How do you want them to respond? What do you want them to do? What's the call to action here that you're wanting? That needs to drive what your content is and what you're asking them. What are the best social media platforms for that particular purpose? And how will I structure my engagement to achieve it? So have a think about that. So once you've decided what stakeholders you're wanting to target, and what platforms and what's the best way of reaching them, you need to then think about your tactics. How do you create a catch line to provoke a particular reaction or a particular call to action? Donating, signing a petition, sharing your content, whatever it is that you want. So as we've gone through some of these platforms before, so those are some of them that we've just covered off. We'll go a bit more in coming moments. This is just some interesting statistics about some of these platforms. Huge amount of users out there. These stats may be probably out of date because they're a week or so old, but there's massive amounts of people out there doing this stuff, and have no doubt that you'll be able to reach your audience with a bit of focus and determination. So we'll just pause for some questions. I don't think I've got any at this stage, but if you... Kate McMahon says, I'm having trouble finding your tribe. I work with a not-for-profit that delivers educational resources. How do I find where teachers hang out online? Well, that's a good question, Kate. I think what you need to do is join. There's a whole lot of ways you could do that. LinkedIn would be a great place. There's a whole lot of groups on LinkedIn that people are members of, or go and search for those groups. I'm a member of a guerrilla marketing group. I'm a member of a whole lot of communications group. So I'm a member of a government relations group in America and in Australia. I created my own not-for-profit communications group, and by the way, feel free to request to join it. You can find that via LinkedIn, or if you're having problems finding that, just email us and we'll send you a link. But you go and have a look on LinkedIn, then find some individuals that are popping up in all of those places, and then go and seek them out in places like Twitter and Facebook. There'll also be groups there, I would imagine, possibly some closed groups, probably some open groups. That's where you just need to sort of do a little bit of due diligence and try and find them. But you will find them. Once you sort of find one, it's a little bit viral. You just go and sort of follow those rabbits down a rabbit hole, and hopefully they will come to you. Now I've got another question from Susan, who says that she says that where she works offers free licenses for not-for-profits as long as you meet certain criteria. That's called Salesforce CRM. I don't know you, Susan, but what I can suggest is send me some information or give me a ring, and we'll be happy to have a look at that with you. But I haven't heard of you before. But thanks for letting us know about that. So I don't have any further questions at this stage, so we'll just keep kicking through. So getting started with social media, define what you want to do, invest in the staff and the budget to run a program. That doesn't need to be massive. It just needs to be manageable and achievable. So determine that it's going to be, a quarter of a resource of a person, or a tenth of one person a week, or it might be it's just you running your not-for-profit, or there's two of you and there's the smell of an oily rag. It's about what you can do and what can you really do in that time, and being quite focused about what you want to achieve in that time based on where you want to take it, what you're wanting to grow. If you're trying to have a national campaign and reach everyone in Australia, well, that takes some effort. So you need to have a think about what your objectives are and are they realistic? How will you get there? And making sure you've got the flexibility to respond to it as you progress, because things don't stay static for very long in social media. So in terms of the basics for social media, use the assets that you set up, but don't set up too many. Don't make it unruly for yourself so you can't manage it. Twitter's great for short messages, event updates, blog posts, breaking news. Flickr is great to publish photos. Facebook, as we know, is great for pictures, really rich content, videos, and detailed messages. Also, sending out invitations to events, as you probably all know. YouTube is a great medium for doing these sorts of things, so you can put really good, solid content that people can then find and search online, like webinars or other things, videos of events, etc., or little films, and hopefully yours will go viral. But making sure that you resource it and that you do it, because I've had not-for-profits who've said to me, we've set up a Twitter feed for them on a Monday, and by Friday I have the CEO who's been on the phone and said, I've only got 34 followers, Joe. Why? And I go, well, you only started it on Monday, and it's something you've got to work at. And I'm sure most of you know that, but it actually takes some effort. It's something that doesn't happen in a vacuum. You've got to keep working on it. So feel free, obviously, to put up some more questions for when we get to them in half an hour or so. So the next thing is some tactics in terms of social media. Making sure that you post regularly, I think is really important, because only about 20% of people ever see a post on social media at any time. So thinking about, how often you'll do that, there's no point in doing it at 11 o'clock at night. If all of your people, are mums, just whatever, working mums or stay-at-home mums, if that's your target market because you're a postnatal group or whatever it is, when are they online? They're probably online when the kids are having a nap during the day. They're probably not online, at school pickup times. So, thinking about when those people are online and working appropriately to those people is a really good thing. Making sure that you include images. And as I said to you before, Kate, The next point, follow and engage with influential stakeholders. That's how you're going to find the people that you need to talk to. You need to do some, solid research on who these people are and where they're located. Follow them. See who they follow. They're going to be following people who would be of interest to you, and you would be able to network with, and that'll increase your networks as well. And you can tag things or replying when content's relevant to you or to them to increase that conversation. You hear that comment, having a conversation on social media. Well, what does that mean? That means that you're actually talking. You're not just shouting and you're not just tweeting. You're actually saying something that people can respond to. If they respond to them and try and actually engage them in that discussion, because people will see that, it will be visible, and by the very virtue of that, that increases the talkability and the engagement, which is fantastic. Asking questions on your posts to encourage people to give you feedback and to come back to you with comments, I think is a really good thing. Getting your community to tell you what they'd like you to be doing, making sure that they give back to, or you're giving back to them, obviously, or you're giving them what they're wanting. So a blog is something, obviously, that you can think about doing. A lot of not-for-profits have blogs, or they have something that looks like a blog, as in, what is a blog and why do it? Some people will say blog is really just fresh content. That's what it is. It's nothing more than that, really. I had a blog when I first moved to I live on a property outside Canberra, and I had a blog, which is just, I'm not doing it very actively. It's called Ponies and Jam. It still sits there, but I'm not actively doing it anymore. It was just a bit of fun for a while. And I'm a bit busy with work, so I haven't been doing it. But, a lot of people will start blogs about all sorts of things. Sometimes those blogs will have issues focuses. They'll have a purpose. They'll have an activity or whatever it is. Those blogs can also sit alongside or be embraced by your own website. And that's more often the best thing for a not-for-profit to do, embrace that fresh content. And how you embrace fresh content is really up to you, and it really depends on how often you can have that fresh content available and really using that fresh content as far and wide as you possibly can. So if you've got some fresh content that you've put up on the website, make sure it's accompanied by a photo, make sure you tell people about it on your other platforms. If you've got a newsletter that's going out to people, tell them about the fresh, whatever it is, the post that you've done. It might be a longer post with some substance in it, some research that you want to share, some international observations that you've got. I mean, a lot of not-for-profits are doing very serious, edgy stuff. So you might be dealing with all sorts of information that you can use really effectively. And I think it's just about how you tell people so that they come and they read it. And it's not just a one-way or two-way process. That those tweets lead back to the website then can lead them onto Facebook, the Facebook can lead them onto so it's hopefully what you want them to do is swim around your social media world as often and for as long a time as you possibly can. So it's about keeping them interested and capturing them and giving them it's a bit like a kid in a childcare centre or a kid in a play centre. How do you keep them interested? Well, you give them lots of things to look at, lots of things to do, because when you look at your Google Analytics that people increasingly aren't necessarily staying on the website for 23 minutes. They're staying there for 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 1.5 minutes on average. So it's about, and then seeing where do they go after they have been on your blog. So keeping them swimming in your social media pool is really what you want to do. So, consider creating a sector-wide blog. I've worked with a couple of not-for-profit peak bodies recently who've actually created their own sector-wide blog. The social services sector's doing that. The education sector's done that with The Conversation. There's a number of sectors who've done that. The superannuation sector's done it. So they've worked out that, content is increasingly diffused, and the way to get content, people reading your content, is to have an attractive site that offers a lot of stuff rather than just an occasional monthly blog update. So, if you're from one of those sorts of organisations that's well-resourced and have got, you're part of a bigger network, have a think about doing that down the track. It obviously is resource heavy and it requires a lot of people. It's something you can't do by yourself, but I think it's increasingly what people are doing. So have a look at things like the conversation and give that some thought. It can, though, be effective with very little resourcing. You don't have to do something like the conversation. You can do something that really just requires an hour a week. You could sit there and schedule 3 blog posts or 3 posts via Market Me Suite, which is what I use, which we use. You can do that in an hour, and you could do all your social media in an hour. It's about it's almost like getting your washing done in an hour, which is an impossible task. But you could probably do it all in an hour if you really were trying. You've got that content, you know what you're doing. So it is something that can be done quite in a small amount of time. So in terms of LinkedIn versus blog, some of the other tips that I think, thinking about, LinkedIn is a really useful way of communicating with a big audience. I mean, I've got now over 5, probably approaching 6,000 people that I am connected with on LinkedIn. I don't know them all at all. I mean, when I first started this agency 4.5 years ago, I think I had 200 or 300. And, it is one of those very viral platforms that, I don't link into people who look like they might sort of be an ex-murderer, but, I will link into someone who is a potential professional contact in whatever way. And it's a platform that I go to. I don't have their updates coming to my inbox, so I'm not inundated by them, but I can, if I want to communicate with my 5 or whatever thousand on LinkedIn, my 1 and a bit thousand on Twitter, my 500 on Facebook, my, the 4 or 5 whatever thousand we've got on our database. So all of it, in one hit on a day, I could communicate to 10 or 12 or whatever thousand people quite quickly. So, thinking about how you can communicate with all these platforms, LinkedIn is a really effective way. People read those messages like they do on Twitter. Different people use and drop into these platforms at different times. There are groups that you can join or groups that you can create. We've created a group. You can create or you can be a member of a group and you can comment or put content up on groups. So it's a really good thing to do on LinkedIn. And add contacts that you've made each week. If you've gone out to an event and you've met some people and you've got their business card, see whether they're on LinkedIn. Very normal to go out and reach out to them on LinkedIn. That's how you're going to increase your network. In terms of blogs, see if you can publish something once a week. That might not be attainable for you, but that's something to try. Share the post on all your other social media sites, as I said, making sure that people are sort of swimming in your world for as long as possible. And share the post with other blogging communities. So there are other, Facebook sites or other sites that you can then go and make a comment on and say, we've got some content here. They're open sites. You can put a comment on or whatever. If you can do that, go ahead and do that as well. Obviously providing it's appropriate content and it's not going to incur the wrath of anyone by doing it. So risk management is something that I think you do always need to think about with social media, and I would always say to hazard to be mindful of that in the background. You need to think about who's got access to the Twitter feed or the Facebook feed or whatever you're using on your behalf or on the organisation's behalf, making sure that they are responsible people, that they're not going to use that irresponsibly. Never tweet when you're angry or drunk, although a lot of people do. But if you're doing it for an organisation, I think that's one of those golden rules. So, and creating a social media code of conduct is often useful, particularly if you've got a reasonable size workforce or staff that you need to, keep informed about what the rules are, what the do's and the do nots are in terms of social media for you. So how to do it well? Sharing free content is a good thing to do. Making sure that they know that you're doing it, but don't sell stuff to people. start an ideas file. You'll often have, I often have, my best ideas when I'm walking the dog, or whenever I'm doing, whatever I'm cooking dinner or whatever, so have a way of jotting down those thoughts. I'll be reading something and I'll go, oh, that's a good idea, whatever that is. So, making sure that you can capture those ideas. There are things that you can do. There are some tools online you can use in Evernote, I think it is, that will allow you to capture stuff, a screenshot, or just send yourself an email or do whatever it is. I also use any.do, which is a thing that integrates into my Gmail, and it's on screen, it's on my phone, so I will capture some tasks for myself, or I'll just literally email myself something, but make sure you keep those ideas, because you'll sort of get really annoyed with yourself and you go, I had that thought, but it's gone. Because increasingly we're getting bombarded with a lot of information, so making sure you capture it is important. Having gurus that you can look up to. There's a whole lot of people that I really observe and see what they are doing. One of the, a very dear friend of mine who's a British former, ethical PR. She had an ethical PR company, is a woman called Julia Hobsbawm, and she is now a professor of networking at a university in the UK, and she does some really interesting work. She's someone that I follow, but I also follow all sorts of people, and I'm into, health blogs and, healthy food blogs and all sorts of stuff. I get inspiration from all sorts of people. So I wouldn't necessarily say just go out and find, your absolute niche and stick to it, because sometimes it's actually from all sorts of different stuff that I will get inspiration from that will then inform other things that I will do. So I've derived, inspiration from, some of my health, the people who are health bloggers that I've listened to, all sorts of places will give you inspiration. So I think going out there and seeking inspiration is a really good thing, and it doesn't cost a cent. You don't have to go out and pay to attend a seminar or a webinar or whatever. You can get it. It's there. It's online. It's free. There's so much content these days that you can get. So just go out and seek it, but just make sure you've captured it somewhere, so that you've got something to remember and go back to. Personal stories are really important, and I think they're more important in some respects because, as I say, one of the things that I love about working with not-for-profits is that it's about people. That's why all of you get out of bed every day and do what you do, because you love what you're doing, because you're helping people and you're putting smiles on people's faces, or you're helping them have a better day or a better life, or whatever it is that you're doing. And that is so good and so rewarding. And, that's what I say to people. We do a lot of lobbying, and so I say to people when they go into politicians, tell them about your passion and tell them about what is driving you and your organisation. What is it that makes you tick? So I think conveying those personal stories is really important. It's just as important as giving that latest technical data about, we've just researched 63, families in, Perth, and who are telling us this or that. Yes, that's good, but I think it needs to be balanced out by those personal stories. I think it is important to have a really good balance. Make sure you have a plan. And I always say, try and be present and be ethical about what you're doing. It is important, I think, with social media to making sure that you regroup, breathe in occasionally, and don't just sit there doing it unnecessarily. Don't occupy time that you could be doing something else that might be more fruitful at that particular moment. So trying to be present when what you're doing, I think, is useful. Getting the details right, I think, is something that often you hear a lot of politicians, particularly very successful ones, say in terms of their own campaigns, whether that's Obama or John Howard or whoever it might be. I think one of the things that they've Kevin Rudd's social media campaign was very effective. They got those details right. They were often very simple. Those platforms they used were very effective. So getting those details right and making sure that there aren't spelling mistakes in the material that you put out, those sorts of things is really important. We've talked a bit about resourcing, but resourcing, don't let that prevent you from doing something, and don't let it slow you down either. Try not to let those multiple sign-offs, stop you from putting out that content. Often I've listened to people who said, look, we've got to get the board to sign off a tweet. Well, you need to think about how that might work. Is it really effective? If you've got something important to respond to, is that really going to work? So you need to think about how you're going to get those things happening to be the most effective for you in your particular organisation. So example actions for Twitter is, look, post 3 times a day if you can, but you might not have that much content. You might not only have content to post once a day. Sometimes it's about repeating that content, but wording it in a different way is another thing that you can do. Try and follow a schedule. That often helps, even if you just jot that down in your diary or somewhere else. Retweet from other users, which I think again helps, create that conversation and creates that network and that tribe feeling if you've got. And there are certain hours obviously that you need to think about tweeting and which are more effective for you. You'll get to know that over time, because you get to know when you get your best response in terms of retweets and people reading them. So example actions for Facebook, again, post each day if you've got the content. If you don't, post when you've got content. Follow a schedule. Try to post before 1 p.m. each day. People, as I said, people often sit down to really, enjoy Facebook. So I think, and they tend to do that in the afternoons. So I think it is good to have that content there. So it's got the best, because it is an iterative platform, so it comes up randomly. It's based on your usage and based on other people's liking and following and reposting and stuff. So, Facebook is one of those sort of platforms that we don't really understand the algorithms behind it. Otherwise, we'd all be millionaires. But, it is about getting your content on there. Monitor it and answer comments if you can, as frequently as you can, at least daily if you can. So let's go on to marketing. And we've got about 10 minutes left. So if anyone's got any more questions, please don't hesitate putting them up, and I'll get to those in the end. So in terms of marketing, I talked about experiential marketing, and I really do suggest that it is something that you explore, and obviously making sure that you do it legally. I would never suggest that you do anything that's not legal, but doing something that's fun. It's a bit cheeky. I did something with a bowel cancer awareness charity, and we took a whole lot of people, big sort of cut-ups of humans into Martin Place, and we had, I think it was 1 in 10 people will get bowel cancer, or 1 in whatever the statistics was. So we had one person that was coloured and the others were white. That's experiential marketing, if you like, because it's quite impactful. It's big. It's not just handing a leaflet out to someone. Girl Guides took they do a biscuit drive. They took a whole lot of biscuits into Martin Place. They're on Sunrise. That was all sort of a bit of a party atmosphere. That's experiential. The Sunrise hosts loved them. They got multiple bags of them sent to them, and they loved them, which I think helped getting them on Sunrise. But your staff are potentially walking billboards for you. That's not to say that you make them have to wear a T-shirt. But, one of the things that always resonates with me, I always remember, is Kylie Tink, the former CEO of the McGrath Foundation, who was a wonderful woman. I don't know whether we've got anyone online from the McGrath Foundation or any one of you have ever heard her speaking, but she's very inspirational. But she always wears pink, or she did always wear pink when she met politicians, or pink, something with pink in it, pink scarf, or a dress with pink flowers with something else on it, or a pink shirt or whatever it was. Because she said, I need to embrace my brand. I speak for my brand. Glenn McGrath would turn up. I do pro bono work for the McGrath Foundation, and he turns up with a pink tie on. They use their brand, whatever that brand is, use it, and so embrace that. And if that's just T-shirts that when you're going out to meet people, if your staff can wear them, at times, whatever that is, it's however you might be able to use that to your best ability. Sorry, Angela from Girl Guides has said, thanks for the Girl Guides mention. Absolutely. I was about to say, Angela, the other thing that you girls do is you wear your uniforms with pride, and that's your brand, and you do it really well. So, it is about using that brand. They are walking billboards. If you've got, 200 people working for you and 600 volunteers, well, give them something to love, give them something to use. So the next, when we just online advertising, I think we've talked about a little bit before. But again, I would explore using that. It is something that you could do. You can do quite cost effectively. It doesn't have to break the budget. Look at plugging and boosting a post on Facebook. Twitter advertising is quite expensive, but if you've got the budget, you might be able to afford to do it. If you've got the budget, test it. It's some thousands of dollars. Instagram's now taking ads as of about a week ago. I haven't looked at the costs, but I imagine they'll be expensive. But explore online advertising. It can be quite effective. I've got a question here from Claudia. How would you suggest employing this type of guerrilla marketing for NFPs who focus on health-sensitive topics? How to be creative while not offensive? Look, let me just tell you a story, and I hope people don't mind me using one rude word. The Jodie Lee Foundation, which was the foundation that I've assisted, they deal with bowel cancer awareness. One of the things they did was they created an app which was I Give a Shit. That's the name of the app, and they did this amazing campaign which was basically encouraging people to go and do the test, the bowel cancer test, which is what you have to do to take the test, and it's pretty normal, Australian expression. And sometimes you can talk about stuff. Sometimes they're sensitive topics. You can't make light of cancer. I've had a lot of personal, people in my family have had cancer, and I can tell you it's not something that you make light of. But I heard a girl this morning on AM talking about, she's, I think, got leukemia, and she's got an exhibition at the, I think, National Portrait Gallery or something, or a museum somewhere. And, and she was talking about what makes her smile was doing art, and she's only 10, I think. So there are ways, I think, of using things that will bring in, and I think you need to test them with the people that you're working with to make sure that they're not offensive. And look, some people might be offended. There is the potential for that to happen, but there also is a fine line by which you can tread. I mean, there are some people with bowel cancer who might find that app offensive, but I think by and large they probably won't. I think it's just about exploring what might be possible, and it may just be, a whole lot of people, in hospital gowns, if you're trying to illustrate, walking around with people on a trolley going, well, these are people that we're helping these people. I don't know. I mean, I'm just sort of brainstorming, but, it's about thinking about how you might be able to have a bit of street theatre that's not funny, but is illustrative rather than necessarily humour. It's about being edgy, perhaps, with some of those causes rather than humour, if you're talking about sick people, obviously. Yes, that's Claudia. I think I might have answered your question and feel free to contact me offline as well if you feel like, joe@50acres.com. So I'll just go through these last few slides, and keep asking questions if you feel like it. So online newsletters, I think we talked about before. There's some free programs that you can use like MailChimp, which are really economical. So don't hesitate using those. There are also ones that you can pay money for, but it's not necessary. You don't need to have an incredibly well designed and amazing newsletter EDM service. You can do it on MailChimp. So again, explore those things and really use them effectively. Creating meaningful gifts is something that I think I did talk about it a little bit before. Yes, there's budget, and yes, they're not free, but leaving behind something that people will use, like a cup, for example. If every politician in Parliament House got a cup from you, then isn't that a great thing? And if they're using it, then it's visible. So, it might be a budget of $500, but it's a really, really useful, it's a really, really well deployed $500. So it's about thinking about how you are going to use that marketing budget and use it effectively. I actually think things like pens or, all that sort of stuff are a little bit passé these days. I think it needs to be something a little bit different, but something that has some longevity, which is one of the reasons why I tend to favour a solid basic cup and a tea towel, because people don't throw them out. They'll throw out a pen, but they won't necessarily throw out a tea towel or a cup. So that's my thoughts on gifts, really. Now there's a couple more slides to go. If I can make them work. We are at the end. So if there are any questions, do shoot them up now, because we are at the end. I don't have any at this stage. We will send you a copy of the webinar, and it'll be available up on YouTube as well. But thank you so much for attending today. It's been lovely sharing some time with you. And if you do want to email me on offline, don't hesitate. Actually, I've got a couple of questions here. One from Helene. How do you reach people? How do you reach people on LinkedIn? How can we attract followers on our page? Look, I actually think that the pages, having an organisation page, is probably a bit overrated. Unless you're like a massive organisation, I actually think a group is more effective, where you've got people to come to you to create this little community. So go and have a look at some of those groups. There's a couple of not-for-profit groups. There'll be groups in your space for sure. And that's where you can attract people to you to talk about your issue. I actually think that's probably a little bit more useful than just doing, a page. Yes, create a page, because then someone else can't take your name. But look at other ways of using LinkedIn. Using it like Twitter. And joining groups and getting people to join your group, I actually think is a more effective way of using LinkedIn. And Kate says thanks. And thanks to you, Kate. And thanks to everyone for joining today. It's been great. We're going to have these every month or two. So we'll let you know however you found out about this today. You hopefully will find out about the next one. If you want to go on our mailing list, you can do that by just jumping on the website, and there's a way of doing that at the bottom of the page, or just send us an email. But I'm sure you found out about it somehow today. Obviously, a couple of other people. Claudia says thanks, and Flavia said thanks as well. So thanks so much to all of you for listening in. There'll be a recording on YouTube, and we'll also send you out a link to a recording as well. And thanks so much, and we'll have another one in a month or two. So thanks so much. Have a lovely day. And if you're in Sydney, I hope it doesn't rain anymore. And have a lovely day, and have a great rest of the week and weekend. Thanks for joining us.